Can you imagine waking up one ordinary morning and realizing that your country's survival hangs in the balance? Can you picture standing on the deck of a warship, staring out across the endless Pacific, knowing that somewhere beyond the horizon an enemy fleet is advancing? Confident, disciplined, certain that you are already defeated? And what if I told you that there was a moment in history when the United States stood exactly at that edge, wounded, humiliated, underestimated, and in just 4 days changed the course of World War II forever? Today, we return to June 1942. We will feel the tension that gripped the decks of American carriers. We will hear the roar of engines, the thunder of explosions, the crackling inferno of burning steel. And above all, we will understand why the Battle of Midway was not just a naval engagement. It was the moment America proved it would not be broken. 6 months earlier, on December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor burned. Battleships lay crippled. Smoke rose into the Hawaiian sky. The shock was profound. Many Americans who are now in their later years still remember exactly where they were when they heard the news on the radio. It was a wound to national pride and a strategic disaster. The Japanese Empire appeared unstoppable. Its forces swept through Southeast Asia, capturing territory with astonishing speed and precision. The strategy was clear: neutralize American power in the Pacific, expand Japan's defensive perimeter, and force the United States into a negotiated peace. To accomplish that, there was one critical objective: Midway. Midway was not a large city. It was not a thriving port. It was a small atoll, seemingly insignificant in the vast Pacific Ocean. But its location made it invaluable. Roughly 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii, Midway was a forward outpost, America's last stepping stone before Pearl Harbor itself. If Japan seized Midway, it could extend its reach, threaten Hawaii again, and establish a defensive barrier that would be extremely difficult to break. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, envisioned a decisive battle. He believed that if Japan could lure the remaining American aircraft carriers into a trap and destroy them, the United States would lose the ability to wage offensive war in the Pacific for years. And here lies the critical point. Japan believed America was reeling. They believed the U.S. Navy was disorganized, demoralized, and incapable of mounting an effective counterstrike. Confidence ran high in Tokyo. The carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, veterans of Pearl Harbor, were the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Their pilots were experienced, battle-tested, and disciplined. The operation against Midway was designed with precision. Diversions in the Aleutian Islands would split American attention. A powerful strike force would hit Midway. Then, when American carriers rushed to defend it, they would be annihilated. But something extraordinary was happening behind the scenes. In quiet intelligence rooms, far from the sound of gunfire, American codebreakers were working tirelessly. They had been intercepting Japanese communications, slowly unraveling elements of the Japanese naval code. They identified references to an objective labeled AF. The question was simple yet urgent. What was AF? Hawaii? The West Coast? The Aleutians? To find out, American intelligence devised a brilliant plan. A message was sent openly from Midway stating that the island's water purification system had failed. Shortly afterward, Japanese intercepts revealed that AF was short on water. The answer was confirmed. AF was Midway. That moment changed everything. For the first time in the Pacific War, the United States would not merely react, it would anticipate. Admiral Chester Nimitz made a bold and calculated decision. Instead of defending Midway directly and risking destruction in port, he positioned his available carriers northeast of the island, out of Japanese scouting range. He would wait. He would strike when the opportunity appeared. The American carrier force was limited. USS Enterprise, USS Ano, and USS Yorktown, recently damaged in the Battle of the Coral Sea and hurriedly repaired in Pearl Harbor in record time. What should have taken months was completed in days. Shipyard workers labored around the clock, understanding that time itself was a weapon. America was still rebuilding. Industrial production was ramping up, but the fleet remained vulnerable. These three carriers represented the core of U.S. naval air power in the Pacific. On June 4, 1942, the battle began. Japanese aircraft launched from their carriers and struck Midway Island. Bombs fell. Buildings were shattered. Runways were cratered. American defenders fought back fiercely, but the island was battered. Yet Midway did not fall. And crucially, the Japanese still did not know where the American carriers were. Meanwhile, American aircraft were taking off in waves. Coordination was imperfect. Communications were strained. Some squadrons became separated. Torpedo bombers, flying low and slow, pressed forward bravely despite overwhelming odds. They were met by swarms of Japanese Zero fighters. One after another, they were shot down. Many never returned. The sacrifice was staggering. These were young men, many barely in their 20s, fully aware that survival was unlikely. Yet they continued their attack runs, drawing enemy fighters lower and lower toward the sea. In those desperate moments, something pivotal occurred. Japanese fighter cover descended to sea level to intercept the torpedo bombers. Above them, at high altitude, American dive bombers searched for the enemy fleet. Through a combination of persistence, chance, and timing that can only be described as historic, they found their targets at precisely the right moment. Within minutes, mere minutes, the course of the Pacific War shifted. Dive bombers from the USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown descended upon the Japanese carriers. Bombs struck the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. On their decks were fueled aircraft armed with bombs and torpedoes being reconfigured for another strike. Explosions ignited aviation fuel. Firestorms erupted. Secondary detonations tore through the ships. Steel twisted. Flight decks buckled. Crews fought desperately to contain the infernos, but the damage was catastrophic. In less than 6 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 frontline carriers were mortally wounded. Pause for a moment and consider that. 6 minutes. 6 minutes that reversed months of Japanese dominance. 6 minutes that erased the core of the fleet that had attacked Pearl Harbor. 6 minutes that proved overconfidence can be fatal. The Hiryu, the last surviving Japanese carrier, launched a fierce counterattack. Its aircraft located and struck the USS Yorktown, leaving her heavily damaged. Eventually, Yorktown would sink, a solemn reminder that victory always carries a cost. But the balance had already tipped. Later that day, American aircraft located the Hiryu and attacked. Bombs found their mark. The 4th Japanese carrier was doomed. When the smoke began to clear, the strategic landscape of the Pacific had changed. Japan had lost 4 fleet carriers, hundreds of aircraft, and many of its most experienced naval aviators. That loss was irreplaceable. Carrier warfare depends not only on ships, but on skilled pilots and trained crews. Japan lacked the industrial capacity and training infrastructure to recover quickly from such devastation. The United States, by contrast, was mobilizing its vast industrial might. Shipyards were accelerating production. New carriers were already under construction. Midway was not the end of the war. Far from it. Bloody battles lay ahead. Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. But Midway marked the turning point. From that day forward, Japan would largely fight defensively. The strategic initiative shifted. The United States would begin its long, grueling advance across the Pacific, island by island. Beyond strategy and statistics, Midway carried enormous moral weight. After Pearl Harbor, Americans questioned their readiness and resilience. Was the nation prepared for total war? Could it stand against a formidable and disciplined empire? Midway answered those questions decisively. It demonstrated adaptability, intelligence, courage, and leadership under pressure. Imagine American families hearing the news in June 1942. Radio announcers describing a major naval victory. For Japanese carriers sunk, the sense of relief must have been profound. For a nation adjusting to rationing, war bonds, and sons shipping out overseas, Midway represented hope. It was the first clear signal that the tide was turning. Leadership played a central role. Admiral Nimitz took calculated risks. He trusted intelligence assessments. He positioned his forces strategically rather than reacting emotionally. Midway was a triumph of preparation as much as bravery. It showed the power of informed decision-making in moments of crisis. Yet victory came at a cost. Hundreds of American servicemen were killed. Pilots were lost at sea. Sailors perished in burning compartments. The USS Yorktown slipped beneath the waves. For every triumphant headline, there were grieving families. Letters that would never be delivered. Futures cut short. For many older Americans, Midway is not an abstract history lesson. It connects to fathers, uncles, neighbors who served. It echoes in faded black and white photographs and medals tucked away in drawers. It is a chapter written not only in textbooks, but in family memory. If Japan had prevailed at Midway, the consequences could have been severe. Hawaii might have faced renewed threat. Allied supply lines to Australia could have been disrupted. The war in the Pacific might have stretched longer and cost far more lives. But in June 1942, ordinary Americans accomplished extraordinary things. Looking back today, it could be tempting to see Midway as inevitable. But it was anything but certain. It was the result of intelligence breakthroughs, daring leadership, sacrifice, and a convergence of timing that changed history. Perhaps the greatest lesson of Midway is this: a nation can be struck down, can bleed, can appear weakened, but if it learns, adapts, and remains resolute, it can rise stronger than before. Pearl Harbor was a devastating blow. Midway was the response, not fueled by blind revenge, but by strategy, resilience, and unity. When we reflect on American history, we speak of independence, determination, and perseverance. Midway embodies those ideals. It was not merely a naval battle. It was proof that the United States would not surrender to fear or intimidation. And so, as we close this chapter, consider this question: what defines a nation in its darkest hour? Is it the damage it suffers, or the way it responds? In the vast blue expanse of the Pacific, far from the American mainland, a generation answered that question. In June 1942, the tide turned. The thunder of bombs over Midway echoed across history. From that point forward, the road to ultimate victory began to take shape. Midway remains a symbol that even after profound shock and loss, resolve can endure. That 6 minutes can alter the fate of nations. That courage, intelligence, and sacrifice, when united, can overcome even the most confident adversary. More than 8 decades later, we still speak of Midway because it represents something timeless. In that moment, America proved that hope does not sink easily. It fights, it endures, and when the time is right, it prevails.